The massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers slid open with a deep rumble that echoed through the vast space. Representatives from hundreds of worlds floated, walked, and slithered into their designated seats, their conversations creating a symphony of alien languages that the universal translators worked overtime to decode. Chancellor Veltara stood at the central podium, her crystalline form catching the light from 3 different suns that streamed through the chamber's transparent dome. She had seen many crises in her 400 years of service, but nothing quite like this. Her translucent fingers drummed against the podium as she waited for the assembly to settle. "Fellow representatives," she began, her voice carrying across the chamber with the authority of centuries. "We face an unprecedented situation that requires immediate attention. The human problem has escalated beyond our previous assessments." A ripple of nervous energy passed through the crowd. The Quilorian delegation huddled closer together, their tentacles intertwining in a gesture of mutual comfort. Ambassador shifted in his seat, his scaled hide changing to a darker shade of blue that indicated deep concern among his species. 3 standard cycles ago, Veltara continued, we received reports of unauthorized terraforming activities in the Kepler 442 system. What should have been a decades-long process involving multiple committees, environmental impact studies, and safety reviews was completed in 6 standard cycles by a single human expedition. Ambassador Creedall rose from his seat, his massive form casting a shadow over the nearby delegates. "I was present when the incident began," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had witnessed something truly extraordinary. Commander Park, June of the Human Diplomatic Corps, was attending a routine trade negotiation on station Omega-7. The discussions were proceeding normally when our long-range sensors detected unusual readings from the dead moon orbiting Kepler 442b. The ambassador paused, his reptilian features showing what might have been confusion in a human expression. The moon's atmosphere was completely toxic. The surface temperature was negative 200 degrees. There were no resources worth harvesting, no strategic value, no reason for any civilized species to show interest. A murmur ran through the assembly. The ethereal collective's representative, a being of pure energy contained within a specialized containment suit, pulsed with curiosity. What exactly did the human do? Creedall's expression grew even more troubled. Commander Park was holding a glass of fermented grain alcohol, discussing mineral rights with the Centauri trade representative. When the sensor data appeared on the main display, he simply looked at the readings for a moment, then turned to me and placed his drink in my hands. The chamber fell silent. Every species present had learned to recognize the significance of that particular human gesture. "He said those words," Creedall continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "Hold my drink." Then he walked to the communications array and began sending instructions to ships that we didn't even know were in the system. The Vorthon representative, whose species had evolved beyond physical form millions of years ago, projected waves of agitation through the chamber's psychic dampeners. The humans bypassed 17 different safety protocols. They used antimatter as a terraforming tool. Antimatter, a substance that our species handles with ceremonies and month-long preparation rituals. They loaded into cargo containers and launched at a moon. Chancellor Veltara accessed the human file through her neural interface, the data flowing directly into her consciousness. The information was both fascinating and terrifying. Humanity had achieved faster-than-light travel not through careful scientific advancement, but by strapping explosive devices to their ships and hoping for the best. They treated radiation exposure like a minor weather inconvenience. When their first colony ship had suffered catastrophic system failures, instead of abandoning it, they had somehow converted it into a mobile battle platform that now served as their flagship. The transformation was complete in 6 standard cycles, she announced to the assembly. A dead, frozen rock with a poisonous atmosphere became a garden world with breathable air, flowing water, and growing vegetation. Our scientists are still trying to understand how they managed to restructure the planetary core using nothing but modified cargo vessels and what their reports describe as creative engineering. Zenthari military observer, a species renowned throughout the galaxy for their strategic brilliance, stood and addressed the chamber. We have been studying human combat and engineering tactics for the past 2 years. Our conclusion is that they operate under a completely different set of assumptions about what is possible. Where we see insurmountable obstacles, they see interesting puzzles. Where we calculate acceptable losses, they find ways to turn disasters into victories. Chancellor Veltara nodded gravely. Which brings us to our current crisis. This morning, we received a formal communication from the human government. They have submitted a request to, and I quote directly from their message, fix the galaxy's energy crisis once and for all. The chamber erupted in panic. Several delegates began transmitting emergency messages to their home worlds. The Carillion representative fainted, which was particularly impressive given that his species had no nervous system in the traditional sense. The details of their proposal are classified pending security review, Veltara continued, but preliminary. Analysis suggests they intend to harness the energy of stellar collapse on an industrial scale. In the distance, visible through the chamber's transparent dome, a star flickered ominously, as if the universe itself was responding to the mention of humanity's latest plan. The research station, a distant hope, floated peacefully in the outer rim of the Andromeda sector, its rotating sections creating artificial gravity for the diverse crew of scientists and researchers who called it home. The station had been designed as a symbol of galactic cooperation, bringing together the brightest minds from dozens of species to study the mysteries of deep space. Dr. Kim Hanna sat in the station's recreation lounge, nursing a glass of synthetic whiskey while discussing genetic adaptation patterns with her colleagues. The xenobiology specialist had been aboard the station for 8 months. She had grown fond of the evening discussions that brought together researchers from across the galaxy. Tonight's group included Dr. Vextel, Quillarian marine biologist whose tentacles gestured expressively as he spoke, and Engineer Zorkon, a drachnary whose scales shifted color as he became excited about his latest discoveries. The conversation was interrupted by a sound that no space dweller ever wanted to hear. The station's emergency klaxons began wailing, their harsh tone cutting through the comfortable atmosphere of the lounge. Red warning lights bathed the room in an ominous glow as the station's artificial intelligence began broadcasting in 17 different languages simultaneously. Attention, all personnel. Void Reaper detected on long-range sensors. Current distance, 47 light-years. Estimated time to arrival, 14 standard hours. All personnel are to report to evacuation stations immediately. This is not a drill. The effect on the alien crew members was immediate and dramatic. Dr. Vextal's tentacles turned pale with fear, while Engineer Zorkon's scales shifted to the deep black that indicated terror among his species. Throughout the station, researchers abandoned their work and began rushing toward the escape pods and emergency shuttles. The Void Reaper was a legend that had haunted the galaxy for over 3,000 years. It was a creature of unknown origin that consumed entire planets, leaving nothing but empty space in its wake. Entire star systems had been evacuated when it appeared, and no military force had ever successfully engaged it in combat. The standard protocol was simple: detect, evacuate, and pray it moved on to consume something else. Dr. Kim remained seated, calmly finishing her drink as chaos erupted around her. She watched the panic with the detached interest of a scientist observing an interesting phenomenon. When bartender Zixtel, a nervous Quillorian who had been polishing glasses behind the bar, began reaching for the emergency beacon with trembling tentacles, she stood and walked over to him. "Hey, hold my drink," she said, placing her empty glass in one of his appendages. Her smile was calm and confident, though Zixtel would later describe it to investigators as terrifyingly confident, and the expression of someone who had never met a problem they couldn't solve with explosives. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for generations. Instead of joining the evacuation, Dr. Kim walked to the station's communication center and began sending messages to other human crew members scattered throughout the research facility. Within minutes, Chief Engineer Li Tae had abandoned his coffee and was sprinting toward the station's power core, while Communications Officer Choyuki was arguing with the station's AI about theoretical physics. The alien crew members who remained on the station watched in bewilderment as the humans began what appeared to be a complete overhaul of the station's systems. Li Te, working with the single-minded focus of someone who had found an interesting puzzle to solve, began rerouting power from the station's life support systems to the mining lasers that were typically used for asteroid research. "What are you doing?" demanded Dr. Vextel, his tentacles writhing with anxiety. "We need to evacuate. The Void Reaper consumes everything in its path." "Not everything," replied Li Te, his hands dancing across the control panels as he reconfigured. "Systems that had never been intended to work together. It consumes matter and energy, but it has to process what it takes in. That means it has vulnerabilities." Meanwhile, Cho Yuki had somehow convinced the station's AI to help with calculations. That violated several fundamental laws of physics. The artificial intelligence, which had been programmed with the accumulated knowledge of dozens of species, found itself attempting to solve equations that existed purely in the realm of human imagination. "These calculations are impossible," the AI protested in its calm, electronic voice. "The gravitational stresses you're describing would tear the station apart. Only if we do them wrong," Cho Yuki replied cheerfully, inputting variables that made the AI's processors overheat. "Trust me, I've done this before." The Void Reaper arrived exactly on schedule, its massive form blocking out the stars as it approached the station. The creature was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, its surface writhing with energy that seemed to bend light around it. It had consumed planets and civilizations, leaving nothing but darkness in its wake. The humans had turned the research station into a trap. Using the mining lasers as gravitational anchors, they created a field that the Void Reaper couldn't easily escape from. Then, instead of trying to destroy it, they began harvesting its exotic matter while it was still alive, using techniques that no other species had ever attempted. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Void Reaper was dead, and the station was powered by exotic matter that would last for the next century.
Oh, yes.
The Zenthari military, renowned throughout the galaxy for their strategic brilliance, sent a team to investigate an officially classified human combat doctrine as organized chaos, with devastating results. Their final report included a recommendation that humans should never be allowed to get bored. Dr. Jiang Wu adjusted his tie nervously as he stood in the waiting chamber outside. The Galactic Council's main assembly hall, the holographic projector, containing his presentation, flickered beside him, displaying complex mathematical equations that most species would need decades to understand. He had been preparing for this moment for 3 years, ever since the energy crisis had begun affecting civilizations across the galaxy. The massive doors slid open with a deep rumble, and Dr. Jiang walked into the chamber, where representatives from hundreds of worlds sat in judgment. The air was thick with tension and the faint smell of ozone from the various life support systems needed to keep so many different species alive in one space. "Honored representatives," he began, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what he was about to propose. "The galaxy faces an energy crisis that threatens to collapse interstellar civilization within the next century. Current power generation methods are insufficient to meet growing demand, and traditional solutions would take millennia to implement." He activated his holographic display, showing a star system that pulsed with dangerous energy. The star at its center was massive, unstable, scheduled to die in a spectacular explosion that would be visible from neighboring galaxies. "The Prometheus project offers a permanent solution," Dr. Jiang continued, gesturing to the display. "We construct a Dyson sphere around the unstable star designated as Kaika 462852. When the star goes supernova, capture the explosion's energy and distribute it throughout the galaxy." The alien representatives began murmuring among themselves in languages that the universal translators struggled to process. The ethereal collective's representative pulsed with colors that indicated deep concern, while the Drachnary ambassadors' scales shifted to the darkest blue possible. "The mathematics are sound," Dr. Jiang said, displaying calculations that filled the air with glowing numbers. "The energy output from a controlled supernova would provide power for the next 1,000 years. We could eliminate energy poverty, fuel expansion into unexplored sectors, power terraforming projects on scales never before imagined." Chancellor Veltara leaned forward, her crystalline features reflecting the light from the holographic display. Dr. Zhang, what is the margin for error in these calculations? Approximately 0.0001%. He replied with the casual confidence that had made humans simultaneously famous and feared. Throughout the galaxy, the chamber erupted in chaos. The Quilorian delegation began wrapping their tentacles around each other in a gesture of mutual protection, while the Vorthan representative's energy field flickered with what could only be described as panic. Several smaller species activated their emergency beacons. Preparing to evacuate their home systems, Ambassador Cradle rose from his seat, his massive form commanding attention. Dr. Zhang, do you understand what you are proposing? One miscalculation, one component failure, one unforeseen variable, and you would destroy 17 star systems. Trillions of lives would be lost. We have accounted for all variables, Dr. Zhang replied calmly. The containment field will hold the energy collectors, will function as designed, and the distribution network will handle the power flow without overloading. But what if you are wrong? Demanded the Zenthari military observer. What if your calculations are flawed? Dr. Zhang smiled, and every alien in the chamber felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Then we will improvise. Vote was unanimous. Every species, every representative, every voice in the chamber declared the Prometheus project too dangerous to attempt. The risk was unacceptable, the consequences too severe, the margin for error too small. Dr. Zhang listened to the speeches, the condemnations and the warnings with polite attention. When the final vote was cast, he simply nodded and began packing his presentation materials into a worn leather briefcase. Thank you for your time, he said, his voice carrying no trace of disappointment or frustration. We appreciate your input. We'll begin construction next Tuesday. The chamber fell silent. Ambassador Credel's jaw dropped open, revealing rows of sharp teeth. You cannot simply ignore the council's decision. We are not ignoring it, Dr. Zhang replied, closing his briefcase with a soft click. We are acknowledging it and proceeding anyway. The energy crisis affects everyone, whether they vote for the solution or not. Within a week, reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. Human construction ships were appearing in the KIC 846-2852 system, accompanied by cargo vessels loaded with materials that had clearly been salvaged from derelict spacecraft. Abandoned mining operations suddenly showed signs of activity as humans borrowed resources that had been sitting unused for decades. The most disturbing reports came from recruitment centers on dozens of worlds. Humans were somehow convincing members of other species to join the construction effort. Engineers, scientists, and workers from across the galaxy were abandoning their safe, regulated jobs to participate in what most considered a suicide mission. The construction site became a multicultural hub of organized chaos. Drachnary engineers worked alongside human technicians, while Quilorian scientists collaborated with ethereal researchers on problems that had never been attempted before. The humans had somehow created an atmosphere of excitement and possibility that infected everyone who came into contact with the project. When Galactic News Network reporter Zixtel managed to get an interview with Dr. Zhang at the construction site, she asked about safety protocols. The human scientist paused in his work, handed his coffee mug to his Carillion assistant, and grinned. We have got this covered, he said. The assistant later required 3 months of psychological counseling. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been running for 36 hours straight, and Chancellor Veltara could feel the stress affecting her crystalline structure. Cracks were beginning to appear along her surface, something that only happened during the most severe crises in her 400-year career. The humans have completed 89% of their construction, reported the Zenthari intelligence officer, his scaled fingers dancing across his data tablet. Our long-range sensors indicate they are ahead of schedule. A wave of panic rippled through the assembled representatives. The Quilorian delegation had wrapped their tentacles around each other so tightly that they resembled a single, terrified organism. The Vorthon representative's energy field was flickering so rapidly that the chamber's psychic dampeners were struggling to contain it. How many systems have begun evacuation procedures? Asked Ambassador Credle, his voice barely above a whisper. Replied the intelligence officer. The Carillion homeworld is relocating its entire population to their colony in the Vega system. The Draknari military has pulled all ships back to a safe distance of 100 light-years. The Ethereal Collective's representative projected waves of frustration through the Chamber's communication network. We attempted to establish a quarantine zone around the construction site. The humans ignored our blockade and continued working. Worse, they have somehow recruited volunteers from dozens of species to help them. Recruited? Chancellor Velterra's voice cracked, sending harmonic vibrations through the chamber. You mean other species are willingly participating in this madness? The humans have created some kind of psychological effect, the ethereal continued. They display such confidence in their impossible plans that other beings begin to believe them. Our scientists are calling it infectious optimism. It appears to be highly contagious. The reports continue to pour in from across the galaxy. The construction site around the unstable star had become a multicultural hub of activity. Draknari engineers worked alongside human technicians, while Quilorian scientists collaborated with ethereal researchers on projects that violated fundamental laws of physics. The humans had somehow convinced beings from dozens of different species that building a cage around an exploding star was not only possible, but routine. Admiral Songmira stood on the bridge of the Defiant Curiosity, watching the massive construction. Through the viewport, the Dyson sphere was nearly complete, its segments gleaming in the light of the unstable star that pulsed ominously at its center. The structure was enormous, easily the size of a small solar system, and it had been built in less than 6 months using salvaged materials and what the humans called creative engineering. Status report, she called out to her crew, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had never encountered a problem she couldn't solve. Sensor. Specialist Bayun looked up from her station, her instruments showing readings that would have sent most species into immediate panic. The star is showing early signs of instability. The alien scientists are predicting supernova in approximately 72 hours. Right on schedule, Admiral Song replied with a smile. How is the sphere construction progressing? Chief Engineer Park Sung didn't look up from his jury-rigged quantum computer, a device that appeared to be held together with spare parts and determination. 97% complete. The final segments are being installed now. I have the gravitational controls running on modified coffee makers, and the AI is helping us calculate the blast vectors. A Zephyrian engineer who had been assigned as an observer by the Galactic Council stared at the human crew with the expression of someone watching a particularly fascinating form of madness. How did you convince a sentient AI to help with this project? Park Sung grinned, his hands continuing to work on calculations that existed purely in the realm of human imagination. I challenged it to a poker game. Turns out artificial intelligence really hates losing to humans. The AI's voice echoed through the bridge with what might have been amusement. The human did not win through superior strategy. He won by bluffing. With a hand that mathematically could not exist, I'm still trying to understand how he achieved this. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the effects of the Prometheus project were being felt in ways that no one had anticipated. The galactic stock exchange had crashed completely when investors realized that humans were serious about their plan to harness a supernova. Insurance companies refused to cover anything within 1,000 light-years of human space. And 3 different species had officially declared the human sector a cosmic hazard zone. The panic was spreading faster than the humans could build their impossible machine. Entire star systems were evacuating, not because they were in immediate danger, but because they had learned to fear what happened when humans decided to fix something. The phrase "hold my drink" had become the most terrifying words in the galactic lexicon. On the construction site, surrounded by partially built megastructures and systems that violated several laws of physics, the human crews continued their work with the cheerful determination of people who had never met a problem they couldn't solve with explosives and creativity. They worked in shifts around the clock, fueled by coffee and an unshakable belief that the impossible was just another word for Tuesday. The star pulsed brighter, its surface beginning to show the telltale signs of imminent collapse. In less than 3 days, it would explode with the force of 1 billion hydrogen bombs, and the humans planned to catch that explosion in a net. made of salvaged spaceship parts and modified kitchen appliances. The galaxy held its breath and waited to see if humanity would save civilization or accidentally destroy it in the process. The massive star, designated KIC 8462852, had been dying for millions of years, but on this particular Tuesday morning, it decided to accelerate the process. Deep within its core, fusion reactions that had burned steadily for eons suddenly began to collapse in on themselves, creating a chain reaction that would normally destroy everything within 50 light-years. Admiral Songmira stood on the bridge of the defiant curiosity, watching the readings on her instruments with the calm attention of someone checking the weather forecast. The star's surface was beginning to ripple with energy that would soon tear apart the fabric of space itself. But she showed no more concern than if she were watching a particularly interesting sunrise. Admiral called out sensor specialist Bei Yun, her voice tight with controlled panic. The star is going critical. Supernova in approximately 14 minutes. That's 3 days ahead of our calculations. The Zephyrian engineer assigned as an observer by the Galactic Council began making rapid calculations on his portable computer, his crystalline fingers moving so quickly they created small sparks. The containment field is not ready. The energy collectors are still calibrating. This will destroy everything. Admiral Song walked over to her command chair and picked up her thermos, taking a slow sip of the coffee that had somehow remained hot despite the chaos surrounding them. She looked at the panicking alien engineer, then at the displays showing the dying star, then back at the thermos in her hands. "Hold my drink," she said, placing the thermos in the Zephyrian's trembling hands. What happened next would be studied in physics laboratories across the galaxy for the next 1,000 years. The humans didn't just contain the explosion, they choreographed it like a cosmic dance performance. The Dyson sphere, which had been cobbled together from salvaged materials and held together with what appeared to be determination and spare parts, suddenly came alive with purpose. Dr. Kim Hanna, now serving as the project's chief scientist, coordinated the final sequence from her position at the sphere's control center. Banks of computers that had been jury-rigged from coffee makers and quantum processors hummed with activity as they calculated trajectories that existed purely in the realm of human imagination. "Gravitational anchors at full power," she reported, her voice carrying across the communication network to construction crews scattered throughout the massive structure. "Quantum channels stabilized and ready for energy collection." Chief Engineer Park Sung was lying on his back beneath a control panel, making last-minute adjustments to systems that no other species would have attempted to build. "The containment field is holding steady. The energy collectors are online. The distribution network is ready to handle whatever this star throws at us." The star's surface began to bulge outward as the fusion reactions in its core reached critical mass. In a normal supernova, this would be the moment when the explosion tore through space at nearly the speed of light, vaporizing planets and sterilizing entire solar systems. Instead, the humans had built a cage around it. "Beginning energy collection in 3, Dr. Kim announced, her fingers dancing across controls that violated several fundamental laws of physics. 2.1. The star exploded with the force of 1 billion hydrogen bombs, releasing more energy in a single moment than most civilizations used in their entire history. The explosion should have destroyed the Dyson sphere. It's vaporized the human fleet and sent a shockwave racing across the galaxy that would have been visible from neighboring star clusters. Instead, the humans caught it. The gravitational anchors held the explosion in place while the energy collectors began their work. The quantum tunnels that Park Sung had constructed using salvaged ship parts and modified kitchen appliances channeled the star's death throes into a network of conduits that distributed the power. Throughout the galaxy, the supernova's energy, instead of destroying everything within 50 light-years, was captured, filtered, and packaged into manageable units that could power entire civilizations. The shockwave, instead of sterilizing nearby systems, was redirected through carefully calculated gravitational fields to clear out a dangerous asteroid field that had been threatening shipping lanes for decades. The Zephyrian engineer, still clutching Admiral Song's thermos, watched the impossible unfold before his eyes. "How?" he whispered. "How did you know it would work?" "We didn't," Admiral Song replied, taking her thermos back and finishing her coffee. "But we knew it had to work, so we made it work." The success of the Prometheus project changed everything. The galaxy's energy crisis was not just solved, but obliterated. There was now enough power to fuel expansion into unexplored sectors, to terraform entire worlds, to support civilizations that had never dreamed of such abundance. 6 months later, the Galactic Council reluctantly accepted humanity as the emergency response species when natural disasters struck, when impossible problems arose, when the laws of physics needed to be politely asked to step aside. The call went out to humanity. The Galactic Emergency Response Corps was officially established with Admiral Song as its first commander. Their headquarters was built around the captured supernova, now a controlled fusion factory that would burn for the next 1,000 years. Their motto, translated into every known language, was simple: hold my drink. When humans said those words, the universe itself held its breath and watched something impossible become routine. The phrase had become synonymous with miracles, with solutions that defied logic. With the peculiar human ability to turn disasters into victories through sheer determination and creative stubbornness, the galaxy was finally safe, powered by human ingenuity and protected by the species that had never learned the meaning of the word impossible.